Hello everyone, welcome to the third lecture of week 5 on modernization and creative communication. So, in the previous lecture, we had focused on the word communication, how it was derived, and what was its role in 17th century. And today we will be delving with the topic communication with the dead, hermeneutics and media, as is described in the book Speaking into the Air, a history of the idea of communication. So, the concept of communication was developed in a culture that routinely sought communication with the distant and the dead. What sex was to the Victorians, death is to us, the ultimate but inescapable taboo. We avert our eyes, fear dwelling on the cross, and sequester death in hospitals, and are easily persuaded by the hygienic rhetoric of cremation. We are miles apart from the 19th century's gloomy romanticism about death. We chuckle at Victorian primness, congratulating ourselves on our liberalism on topics like sexual, but nothing is so veiled to us as death, so cloaked in euphemism, or as pervasive in popular culture. So, the concept of communication with the dead serves as a powerful metaphor for hermeneutics, the art and science of interpreting texts and cultural artifacts from the past. In engaging with historical texts or the legacies of long departed individuals, interpreters metaphorically communicate with the dead, seeking to bridge the temporal divide and bring past voices, intentions, and meanings into the present. This metaphor captures the essence of hermeneutics, a dialogue across time, where understanding is achieved by reviving and reinterpreting what was once thought, written, or created. In our modern society, death has become a deeply ambivalent subject. On the one hand, it is treated as a taboo, often shrouded in euphemisms and avoided in direct conversation. On the other hand, death permeates popular culture from films and books to digital media, manifesting as a recurring theme in entertainment, art, and storytelling. This paradoxical relationship with death mirrors the Victorian era's treatment of sex. Both are subjects of fascination and repression. Representing what? Representing ultimate human experiences that society both shuns and obsesses over. Communication with the dead also provides a very rich framework for understanding history, literature, and media. In history, it encapsulates the practice of reconstructing the lives, thoughts, and experiences of those who are no longer here, striving to make sense of their world while acknowledging the gaps and silences in the historical record. In literature, the metaphor underscores the reader's engagement with the text from the past, where authors and their works continue to speak to contemporary audiences through interpretation and analysis. Now, mourning dominated Victorian life. From dress codes to elaborate rituals, black clothing, as you have seen in many films or many TV series, this black clothing symbolized universal mourning, right? And items such as mourning cards, jewelry with locks of hair, and funerary ornaments were very commonplace artifacts. Lewis Mumford suggests that the pervasive black clothing in 19th century was an unwitting expression of a civilization in mourning. Cemeteries became spaces not only for contemplation but for the social activities like picnics and pilgrimages. The color of one's clothing announced degrees of mourning: black, white, grey, and finally the mauve. Queen Victoria, of course, led the way spectacularly, daily laying out Prince Albert's shaving kit for him until she was dead, decades after he died. The high point of Victorian poetry was characteristically a long lament for a lost comrade. Tennyson's In Memoriam, A.H.H. Tennyson's soulmate died in 1833, but the poem was not completed until 1849. Tennyson spent 16 years in writing the elegy. No psychologically certified stages of grief for him. Victorian literature was filled with spirits returning from the dead. Then Dickens' Scrooge first thought Marley's ghost was, I say this within quotes, an ill-digested piece of cheese. But this materialistic suspicion of Hamburgery would eventually bow to the incontrovertible proofs of the ghost's reality. Edgar Allan Poe is the archetypal romancer of the dead. Cemeteries were places of contemplation, pilgrimage, and picnic. Nowhere is the strangeness of the period with its obsession about death, its high moral tone, and its sentimentality better expressed than in the cemeteries. So, now we will be discussing on hermeneutics and communication with the dead. Hermeneutics is the study and practice of interpreting texts that have become disconnected from their original historical or cultural context. It arises from a situation where communication between the writer and the reader has been disrupted, whether by differences in time, culture, or any other forms of engagement, other forms of estrangement. This process begins where direct, unmediated communication is no longer possible, addressing the complexities of understanding messages that come to us in fragmented or mediated forms. A significant stream of hermeneutics shaped by thinkers such as Schleiermacher or Dilthey and Gadamer views interpretation as a means to transcend these gaps. Their approach aims to open a pathway not just to understanding the texts, but also to fostering a kind of dialogue between the living and the dead, a conversation that seeks to restore meaning and connection across the divides of history. However, there is another tradition within this hermeneutics, one that is less concerned with building bridges and more focused on the inherent challenges and limitations of interpretation. This perspective, associated with the thinkers like Hegel, Marx, and Kierkegaard, emphasizes the impossibility of fully recovering the original intent or meaning of any communication. It suggests that all relationships, even those between living individuals are fundamentally hermeneutic in nature, relying on the interpretation of traces or external signs. According to this view, no subject communicates directly. Instead, expression is always mediated through objects, symbols, or other external forms that require interpretation. This approach highlights the fractured and mediated nature of understanding itself rather than attempting to smooth over these kind of difficulties. Paul Ricoeur believes hermeneutics explores the breaks in communication, challenging the idea that a breakdown in dialogue is unusual or bad. He argues that dialogue is often broken because it's essentially textual. This disruption isn't a flaw, but what makes conversation necessary. It highlights gaps that needs attention. For Ricoeur, the characteristics of text aren't deviation from normal communication. They reveal what's usually hidden in face-to-face talk. Texts show that distanciation where meaning extends beyond its original context, author and audience. This distance isn't alienating. It frees meaning from the constraints of immediate interactions. Writing, in this case in particular, opens up the dialogue, addressing an indefinite universal reader. Hermeneutics then is the art of interpreting texts that no longer have a live audience, making reading like eavesdropping on a conversation meant for someone else. Emerson doubts this, doubts the possibility of true communication here, whether between the living or the living and the dead. Like Kierkegaard's idea of loving others as if they were dead, Emerson views a connection as inherently distant and indirect. He sees life as mediated, describing existence as an absence, never a presence. Rather than soul-to-soul connect or soul-to-soul contact, Emerson believes in interpreting traces left by the past, what he calls an anamnestic reading. He emphasizes that physical proximity does not bring closeness, calling human connection a porcupine impossibility. Despite this distance, Emerson celebrates the universe as a constant transmitter of meaning. In his 1839 lecture, Demonology, he urged embracing creative reading, interpreting the world's sign to uncover meaning regardless of intent. Now we come back to the medium that we were discussing even in our previous lecture, if you remember. Medium is very important one of the important elements when we talk about communication system. So let's find out how symmetry works as a medium here. Symmetries symbolize the distance in communication, bridging communal history and personal memory while underscoring the separation between the living and the dead. In his Sleepy Hollow address, Emerson reflects on this gap, emphasizing the impossibility of soul-to-soul contact and asking, how shall we catch the escaped soul? For Emerson, symmetries invite interpretation of the traces left behind, highlighting what? Highlighting the mediated and indirect nature of all connection. Now, the phonograph, like one they're given in the picture, you can always refer to, like writing and photography, preserves fleeting moments, capturing and immortalizing sounds that would otherwise fade away. As a copyist, it raised similar anxieties to earlier technologies of reproduction. Acting as a form of writing, it separated sound from its original context, disembodied voices, and opened them to an indefinite audience, echoing Socrates' concerns about writing, but with a very positive twist. Thomas Edison boasted of the phonograph's ability to faithfully reproduce sound without the need of the original source, overcoming time and death. This invention marked a radical shift, capturing the flow of time itself in a way no previous technology had achieved. Emerging in 1877, the phonograph transformed how humans interacted with sound, democratizing the experience of hearing disembodied voices, a phenomena once limited to poets and the mad. It brought the human voice into machines, altering sensory experience and symbolizing modernity's profound reorganization of perception. Communication with the dead is one-sided, like sending letters without a reply. It shows the limits of engagement, just like Herman Melville's Bartleby, the scrivener. Bartleby's constant refusal to participate, saying, I quote, I prefer not to, is a metaphor for the inability to communicate, much like the dead's silence. This idea challenges the belief that communication only has value if it's reciprocal. Even when there's no response, expressive acts can still hold dignity. Emerson, for example, saw nature as a hieroglyphic writing of intelligence. Nature communicates with us, within us, even if it doesn't answer directly, reminding us that communication doesn't always need a reply to be meaningful. Now, the dead. What about the dead? The dead teaches us the virtues of patience and interpretation, offering lessons that are neither immediate nor direct. Engaging with the past requires a shift in perspective and acceptance that communication with the dead is not at all a dialogue but an act of deciphering traces, fragments, and echoes that are left behind. Hermeneutics, the art of interpretation, as I have already mentioned, provides the framework for this engagement. Rather than expecting active interactions, hermeneutics involves reading the signs, symbols, and remnants of the past with the care and imagination. Understanding meaning in this context demands attention to both the historical and cultural circumstances in which these traces originated, as well as the creative effort to bring them into resonance within the present. Communication with the dead then resembles the exchange of dead letters, messages that were never received, correspondences stranded in time, right? These letters, like the relics of the past, invite us to reconstruct their significance, finding connections across the gaps of history. The act of interpretation becomes then a way of bridging the unbridgeable, transforming absence into a form of presence through the imaginative reconstruction of meaning. In modern media, there are two big things that stand out. Number one, the ease with which the living interact with the traces of the dead. And number two, the challenge of telling the difference between communicating over distance and communicating with the dead. The same technology that allows us to send messages across the world can also capture voices and images, preserving them from playback. The key difference is that while we have a conversation with people far away, we can't truly converse with the dead. The dead don't respond. They only leave what? They only leave behind fixed, unchanging messages. Like Socrates said about writing, their words are always the same, never changing. We can read their traces, but we can't interact with them directly, right? Even in spiritualism, the connection is very fragile. As Ellen Sedgwick observed, the dead often fail to convey clear messages. Communication with the dead is less about interaction and more about interpreting the traces they have left behind. Modern media shapes how we remember and mourn by immortalizing traces of the deceased. For example, annual tributes at Edgar Allan Poe's grave and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial reflect ongoing dialogues with the history. These media representations help preserve memory, allowing people to mourn and connect with the past, fostering collective reflection and grief. Now, lessons from the dead needs to be taken into consideration. Talking to the dead is seen as both an art and a philosophy. It teaches humility, patience, and the creativity needed to interpret meaning. Since direct communication isn't possible, we engage with what they leave behind, memories, writings, or physical remnants. Instead of viewing this as a limitation, it becomes a meaningful act, turning interpretation into an art. So the idea that in all our conversation we write and receive only unanswered letters captures this. It suggests that even among the living, much of our interaction involves interpreting unanswered messages, finding meaning in the gaps. So, in their silence, the dead become profound teachers. They show us how to navigate a world shaped by absence, teaching us to interpret and connect thoughtfully, even when direct responses are out of reach. By learning from their traces, we grow more creative and engaged with the world around us. Thank you.